The woman kneeling before the disgraced third prince, offering him tea in her modest apothecary, does not know that he could have her entire street razed with a single order. And he has absolutely no intention of telling her because she has just called him a bit peaky, and he finds he rather enjoys it. She does not know his name, his real name. She does not know that the soft-spoken physician's assistant, who has been grinding herbs in her back room for the past 3 weeks, who blushes when their fingers touch over the mortar and pestle, who claims to be the nephew of a traveling doctor from Yangzhou, is actually Zhou Yuan, third son of the Celestial Emperor, currently meant to be in exile 3 provinces away for the crime of speaking truth to a father who preferred beautiful lies. She knows only that he is terrible at measuring dried chrysanthemum, passably good at setting bones, and possessed of the saddest eyes she has ever seen on a man who laughs as easily as he does. What Zhou Yuan knows, sitting in physician Wen A's modest establishment with its crooked shelves and the smell of old ginseng hanging heavy in the air, is that he has made a series of catastrophically poor decisions in rapid succession, and he is about to make several more. The trouble had begun, as these things often do, with good intentions and a stolen horse. 4 weeks earlier, Zhou Yuan had been kneeling in his father's audience hall, listening to the emperor explain in exquisitely polite terms that calling the Minister of Revenue a lying tortoise with the moral backbone of wet rice paper during a full court session was perhaps not the behavior expected of an imperial prince. The fact that the Minister of Revenue was indeed a lying tortoise with the moral backbone of wet rice paper was apparently beside the point. His Celestial Majesty had suggested, in the way that emperors suggest things that are actually commands wrapped in silk, that his third son might benefit from a period of quiet contemplation at a monastery in distant Yunnan province, far from court, far from politics, far from anyone Zhou Yuan might accidentally insult with his catastrophic addiction to honesty. Zhou Yuan had bowed, had accepted his exile with the grace expected of a prince, had made it almost 6 hours down the imperial highway with his official escort, before realizing that quiet contemplation sounded significantly worse than death, and also that the Minister of Revenue would spend his absence consolidating power and bleeding the treasury dry, and someone really ought to do something about that. Except Zhou Yuan was being sent away specifically to prevent him from doing something about that. So he had stolen a horse. Well, borrowed a horse from his own escort, which was technically theft when one was in official disgrace. His personal guard, Captain Wei, had watched him do it with the long-suffering expression of a man whose every instinct said to stop his prince, and whose personal loyalty said to hand him the saddle. "My lord," Captain Wei had said, not moving to stop him. "This is an extraordinarily poor idea." "I know," Zhou Yuan had replied, cinching the saddle with hands that shook slightly from either fear or exhilaration. He had not examined the feeling too closely. "The emperor will be displeased." "The emperor is already displeased. I have decided to earn it properly." "Where will you go?" Zhou Yuan had not actually had an answer to that. He had simply ridden into the gray dawn, with the vague notion of lying low until he could figure out how to expose the minister's corruption without getting himself executed for disobedience. The plan had not extended much beyond "do not get caught" and possibly grow a beard. The beard had not taken. What had taken was a fever, contracted from falling into a river while avoiding an imperial patrol, followed by a desperate stumble into the first town he had found, which happened to be Qinghe, small, dusty, utterly unremarkable, and home to one physician Wen Ai, who had found him collapsed against her door frame like discarded laundry, and dragged him inside with the terrifying efficiency of a woman accustomed to bodies in various states of distress. She had saved his life. She had also, upon his recovery, offered him a job. "You said you studied medicine," she had said, not looking up from the poultice she was preparing. She had clever hands, he had noticed. Quick and sure. Can you grind herbs without destroying them? He could, actually. His mother, the late gentle consort, had taught him before her death. Medicine had been her hobby, her escape from the suffocating boredom of the palace. Zhou Yuan had learned at her knee, partially because he loved her, and partially because the imperial physicians were largely useless, and he had preferred not to die of their incompetence. "I can," he had said. "Can you keep your mouth shut and follow instructions?" This was a more complicated question. The honest answer was demonstrably not, as evidenced by my current situation. But Zhou Yuan had discovered he very much wanted to stay in this cramped, herb-scented shop, with this sharp-tongued woman who had not once bowed to him, or called him my lord, or treated him like anything other than a mild inconvenience she had decided to tolerate. Yes, he had lied. She had squinted at him. "You're lying." Yes, he had admitted. She had laughed. The sound had done something unfortunate to his chest. A small warm collapse like a dam giving way to something he had not known he was holding back. "Well, at least you're honest about being a liar. You can stay. 1 week trial. If you're useless, out you go." That had been 3 weeks ago. In that time, Zhou Yuan had learned that Wen Ai ran the only apothecary in Qinghe, that she had studied under her grandmother, that her parents had died when she was 16 and left her this shop and a younger brother to raise. He had learned that she was stubborn, brilliant, and possessed of absolutely no tolerance for incompetence. He had learned that she hummed while grinding herbs, that she took her tea too hot and drank it too fast, that she had a small scar on her left hand from a dog bite, and a patient who had not warned her about his pet. He had learned that he was falling in love with her with the slow inevitability of a landslide, and that this was going to end catastrophically for everyone involved. What he had not learned was how to prevent that catastrophe. So he had simply decided not to think about it, which was working beautifully right up until the morning when Ai's younger brother walked into the shop and upended everything with the casual precision of a child lobbing a stone through a paper window. Wen Dafu was 11 years old, possessed of his sister's sharp eyes and absolutely none of her diplomatic restraint. He announced himself each morning by slamming the shop door open and declaring whatever observation he had made on his walk from the small house they shared 3 streets over. Today's observation was, there are soldiers in the market asking about a missing prince. Zhou Yuan, who had been grinding cinnamon bark into powder, inhaled it. The coughing fit that followed was spectacular. Wen Ai had to pound him on the back, while he wheezed and tears streamed down his face, and his lungs attempted to exit his body via his throat. Through the haze of his suffering, he heard Dafu say, with the pitiless clarity of children everywhere, "Are you the missing prince?" "No," Zhou Yuan croaked. "Absolutely not. You look like you might be a prince. You have soft hands. Lots of people have soft hands, not people who grind herbs for a living." Dafu had wandered over to examine Zhou Yuan's hands, which Zhou Yuan attempted to hide behind his back like a guilty thing. "Sister, look at his hands. These are prince hands." Wen Ai, who had stopped pounding Zhou Yuan's back and had gone very still, said quietly, "Dafu, go check the storeroom inventory." "But now." The boy went, but not before shooting Zhou Yuan a look of profound suspicion. In the silence that followed, Zhou Yuan attempted to formulate a plausible explanation for his soft hands. Perhaps he moisturized. Perhaps he was simply blessed with good skin. Perhaps he could fling himself into the street and run, though his lungs were still staging a revolt, and he would likely make it 3 steps before collapsing. Wen Ai said, still in that quiet voice, "You are not from Yangzhou." It was not a question. "I have been to Yangzhou," Zhou Yuan tried. "You speak like a northerner." Capital vowels, catastrophe, Zhou Yuan thought. With a strange calm, was simply inevitability catching up to poor decisions. "I can explain. Can you?" "No," he admitted. "Not in any way that will not make this worse." She crossed her arms. In the morning light filtering through the paper windows, she looked like an avenging general preparing to rain fire upon the unworthy. Zhou Yuan had never found anything more attractive in his life, which was probably indicative of some deep character flaw he should examine later, assuming he survived the next 5 minutes. "Try," she said. So he did. He told her not everything, but enough, that he was not who he had claimed to be, that he was in trouble with authorities, that he had needed to disappear for a while, that everything he had told her about knowing medicine was true, and everything he had told her about being the nephew of a physician from Yangzhou was exceptionally false. What he did not tell her was that he was the 3rd prince. That seemed like the sort of detail that would transform this disaster into an apocalypse. And Zhou Yuan had some experience with apocalypses. He had caused at least 3 at court, and preferred to avoid them when possible. Wen Ai listened with the focused attention she usually reserved for difficult diagnoses. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "So you are a criminal," she finally said. "Technically." running from the law, in a sense. And you decided my apothecary was an appropriate place to hide. In my defense, I was fevered and not thinking clearly. And now, are you thinking clearly now? Zhou Yuan considered this. The honest answer was that he had not thought clearly since the moment she had smiled at him over a bowl of bitter medicine and told him to stop being a baby about the taste. No, he said. I am thinking very poorly and have been for weeks. Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, or something softer. But before he could identify it, Dafu's voice floated from the storeroom. We are almost out of dried persimmon. Also, I can hear everything you are saying, and I still think he is a prince. When I closed her eyes briefly, gathering patience from wherever she stored it. Dafu, that is not helpful. Just saying, princes have soft hands and nice teeth. He has very nice teeth. My teeth are not relevant to this discussion, Zhou Yuan called back. Everything is relevant when you are lying about who you are. Dafu emerged from the storeroom with a jar of something murky. Sister, if he is a criminal, should we turn him in? Is there a reward? Dafu, I am just asking practical questions. Wen I looked at Zhou Yuan looked at Wenye. Between them hung the weight of 3 weeks of careful friendship, of hands touching over herb jars, of laughter shared over failed remedies and successful ones, of all the small intimacies that built between people who worked side by side and pretended not to notice how often they engineered reasons to stand close to one another. Please do not turn me in, Zhou Yuan said. I have not done anything truly wrong. I simply made someone powerful very angry by being right at an inconvenient time. That is an extremely prince-like thing to say, Dafu observed. Dafu, so help me. What? The boy said. It is. When I held up a hand for silence. To Zhou Yuan, she said, if I let you stay, those soldiers will eventually come here. They will ask questions. Yes. They will be looking for someone in hiding. Yes. So we will have to make sure you are not hiding. She said this with the air of someone solving a particularly thorny medical puzzle. We will have to make you extremely visible, Zhou Yuan blinked. I am not certain I follow. You are my new physician's assistant. You have been here for weeks. You are learning the trade. There is nothing suspicious about you because there is nothing to be suspicious about. You are simply here, working, in plain sight. She was warming to her own plan now, he could see. Her eyes had taken on the gleam they got when she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. When the soldiers come, we tell them the truth. You are my assistant. You help with the shop. What is your name? My name? Your real name is clearly not the one you gave me. What should I call you? Zhou Yuan made a rapid calculation. His personal name was dangerous, too distinctive, too well known. But his milk name, the one his mother had called him before she died, the one no one at court had used in 15 years. Yuan, he said. Just Yuan. Yuan, she repeated, testing it. Then to Dafu, make yourself useful, go to the market, listen to what the soldiers are asking, come back and report. Dafu brightened. He liked assignments that involved potential espionage. Should I be sneaky? You should be a normal child buying vegetables. Can you do that? Probably not, but I will try. He was out the door before either of them could reconsider. Alone again, when I turned back to Zhou Yuan. If this goes wrong, it will not. You do not know that. No, he admitted. But I do know that He stopped. What he had been about to say was too large, too true, too dangerous in an entirely different way than imperial soldiers. I will not let harm come to you or your brother because of me. She studied him. He could not read her expression, which was probably for the best. If he had known what she was thinking, that he looked like something worth trusting, despite every rational objection, that she had known he was lying about something from the beginning, and had let him stay anyway because loneliness was its own kind of illness, and she had been sick with it for longer than she cared to admit, he would have kissed her. And that would have been a mistake for at least 7 distinct reasons he could name, and likely dozens more he could not. The soldiers will be here by midday, she said instead. We should prepare. You should look busy, competent, like you belong here. I am busy. I am competent. You ground cinnamon bark so fine this morning that it is now powder suited only for incense. And you put the dried mint in the jar labeled ginger. Ah, Zhou Yuan said. Yes, that is... I was distracted. By what? By you, he did not say. By the way you tilt your head when you are listening to a patient's complaint. By the fact that I have begun to measure my days by the moments when you smile. By the growing certainty that I have been sleepwalking through my entire life until I fell into your doorway and woke up. The cinnamon was more challenging than anticipated, he said instead. She made a noise that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. Go reorganize the storage room. Try not to poison anyone by mislabeling things. I will do my best. Your best is what concerns me. But she was smiling when she said it, and Zhou Yuan went to reorganize the storage room with the ridiculous lightness of a man who has just been granted an undeserved reprieve and knows it. The soldiers arrived as predicted, just after midday. There were 4 of them, wearing the dark blue of imperial guards, and they brought with them an air of casual authority that made Zhou Yuan's hands go cold, even as he kept his face carefully neutral. He was in the front room, ostensibly checking the shop's supply of common remedies, actually trying very hard to look like someone who had every right to be there and nothing whatsoever to hide. Wen I greeted them with professional courtesy. Gentlemen, are you unwell? We have remedies for travel fatigue, digestive troubles, saddle sores. We are looking for someone, the lead soldier said. He was young, overly serious, with the rigid posture of a man trying to embody authority he did not quite feel. A man, northern accent, well-educated, possibly claiming to be a physician or scholar. Have you seen anyone matching this description? Wen I did not even glance at Zhou Yuan. Half my customers are men with northern accents claiming to be educated. You will have to be more specific. This man would be traveling alone, possibly ill or injured. He would be trying not to draw attention. So a man who was like every other man, but more secretive about it. Wen I's tone was perfectly polite and absolutely dry. Forgive me, but that describes nearly every man who has ever visited an apothecary with an embarrassing ailment. One of the other soldiers snorted. The lead soldier shot him a quelling look. This is an imperial matter, he said, with the air of someone playing his strongest card. The man we seek is wanted for questioning by order of His Celestial Majesty. Zhou Yuan's stomach attempted to escape via his throat. He focused very hard on the jar of dried angelica root in his hands and prayed to every god he had ever offended, which was most of them, that his face remained neutral. Imperial matter, Wen I repeated. How exciting. What did he do? That is not your concern. Of course not. I am simply curious whether I should be frightened or impressed. Before the soldier could respond, she gestured at Zhou Yuan. This is my assistant, Yuan. He has a northern accent and delusions of education. Would you like to question him? Zhou Yuan's prayer upgraded to frantic negotiation. He would donate to temples. He would stop insulting corrupt officials. He would... You, the lead soldier said, looking at him properly for the first time. Where are you from? Yangzhou, Zhou Yuan said. Because the lie had already been told, and there was nothing to do but commit to it, like a man jumping off a cliff, in the hope that the ground would prove softer than expected. You do not sound like you are from Yangzhou. My mother was from the north. I learned to speak from her. This at least was true. Truth, Zhou Yuan had learned, made lies more convincing, like sugar making medicine go down easier. What are you doing here? Learning the apothecary trade. Physician Wen has been kind enough to take me on as an apprentice. How long have you been here? 3 weeks. Can anyone verify this? Everyone in town, Wen I interjected smoothly. He is terrible at measuring doses and made old Madame Chen's arthritis remedy so strong she claimed to see her dead husband. We are still apologizing. It was very memorable. This was horrifyingly also true. Zhou Yuan had misjudged the processed aconite root and had spent 2 days convinced he had accidentally poisoned a respected elder. Madame Chen had been fine. More than fine, actually. She claimed her knees had not felt better in years, but Zhou Yuan's conscience had needed considerably longer to recover. The soldier looked between them, clearly trying to determine if he was being mocked. The man we seek is a person of some importance. He would not be working in a provincial apothecary. Then I am certainly not him, Zhou Yuan said, with perfect honesty. As I am demonstrably working in a provincial apothecary and am of no importance whatsoever. The logic of this seemed to satisfy the soldier, or at least bore him into acceptance. He nodded curtly. If you see anyone suspicious, you are to report it immediately. There is a reward for information leading to his recovery. How much? Dafu's voice came from the doorway. The boy had returned from the market at exactly the wrong moment, as children inevitably did. He was holding a basket of vegetables and vibrating with ill-concealed excitement. The reward, I mean. How much is it? Dafu, when I said warningly. I am just asking. If we are meant to be looking, we should know what we are looking for and what we get for finding it. The soldier named a sum that made Zhou Yuan's vision blur slightly at the edges. It was enough to buy this entire shop 3 times over. It was enough to transform a struggling apothecary into a wealthy household. He waited for Dafu to point at him and announce his suspicions. He waited for Wen-I to reconsider her mercy in the face of practical economics. He waited for the careful life he had built here to collapse like a house of cards in a stiff wind. Instead, Dafu squinted at the soldier and said, "That is a lot of money for one man. He must have done something really bad or really embarrassing. Which is it?" "That is not your concern, boy." "That means embarrassing," Dafu announced with confidence. "Sister, should we be concerned that there is an embarrassing prince running around?" "He is not a prince," the soldier said, too quickly. Dafu's eyes went wide. "He is a prince? The missing person is a prince?" The lead soldier looked like he was seriously reconsidering his career choices. "I did not say that." "You did, though, just now. You said he is not a prince, which means you are thinking about princes, which means he probably is one." Dafu turned to Zhou Yuan. "Did you hear him? He is looking for a prince." "I heard," Zhou Yuan managed. His heart was attempting to beat its way out of his chest and flee to somewhere safer, like a battlefield or a tiger's den. "Well," Dafu said cheerfully, turning back to the soldiers, "we definitely have not seen any princes. Princes probably do not fall into rivers and nearly die of fever. Also, they would not be bad at measuring herbs, so you are looking in the wrong place." The soldier stared at Dafu. Dafu stared back with the unblinking innocence of a child who knew exactly what he was doing and had decided to do it anyway. "We will continue our search," the soldier said finally. "Report anything suspicious." They left. The door closed behind them. In the sudden silence, Zhou Yuan discovered he had been holding his breath and possibly his soul. He exhaled slowly. "Well," when I said, "He is definitely a prince," Dafu announced, dumping his vegetables on the counter. "I knew it. Soft hands, nice teeth." And he went completely white when they said imperial matter. "Dafu, it is fine, sister. I am not going to turn him in." Dafu looked at Zhou Yuan with the calculating expression of someone who had just acquired significant leverage and was deciding how to spend it. "But you owe me. Princes are supposed to be good at swords and riding horses and imperial things. Can you teach me sword fighting?" What? "Sword fighting. Can you teach me?" "Dafu, he is not actually a prince," when I said. But her voice lacked conviction. "He is absolutely a prince. Look at him. He has prince posture." Dafu demonstrated what he apparently believed was prince posture, which involved throwing his shoulders back and lifting his chin to an absurd angle. "See? Like that. All stiff and uncomfortable." "I do not stand like that," Zhou Yuan protested. "You do, though," when I said quietly. When he looked at her, she had that expression again, the one he could not read, the one that made him feel like he was standing on a cliff edge in the dark. Especially when you are nervous, you stand like you are expecting someone to announce you. Zhou Yuan sat down heavily on the nearest stool. There seemed no point in continuing to stand at all, let alone with correct posture. "I can explain." "Can you?" "No," he admitted. For the second time that day, he found himself telling the truth, because lies had become too exhausting to maintain. I am the third prince. I was being sent into exile for political reasons. I left. I should not have left. I have made a series of catastrophically poor decisions, and now there are soldiers looking for me, and I have put you both in danger, and I am sorry. I will leave. Today. Now. You can tell them I was here and claim the reward. You should claim the reward. That money could—" "Stop talking," when I said. Zhou Yuan stopped talking. She was looking at him the way she looked at particularly complicated medical cases, with focused intensity and a slight frown that meant she was thinking at speeds that left normal conversation behind. "You are the third prince. The one who called the Minister of Revenue a lying tortoise. You heard about that. Everyone heard about that. It was the most entertaining thing to happen at court in years, according to the merchants who came through last month. She paused. They said you were right about the corruption. I was right. I am right. He is bleeding the treasury dry, and no one will stop him because he has bought every official who might. Zhou Yuan caught himself. Sorry, this is not relevant. It is, though. When I had that look she got when she was solving a problem, when all the disparate symptoms suddenly formed a pattern she recognized. You made someone powerful angry by telling the truth, so they sent you away. And instead of going quietly, you ran. Yes. That is phenomenally stupid. I know. You are risking execution for what? The principle of the thing? Someone has to do something. And that someone has to be you? You, specifically, have to be the one to fix imperial corruption, while hiding in my apothecary and mislabeling herbs? Put like that, it did sound ridiculous. Zhou Yuan found he could not quite defend himself, possibly because she was right, possibly because he had not actually thought through any of this, beyond the immediate desire to not spend the rest of his life contemplating his failures in a distant monastery. I am not going to turn you in, when I said. Zhou Yuan blinked. You are not? Of course not. Do you think I want to be known as the woman who sold out the only imperial prince with enough spine to call out corrupt officials? The merchants would never let me hear the end of it. She crossed her arms. But you cannot stay here, not like this. The soldiers will be back. They will ask more questions. Someone will eventually notice that my assistant appeared exactly when their missing prince disappeared. I will leave. You will stay, she corrected. But we will have to be smarter about it. She looked at Dafu. How much do you trust your friends to keep a secret? Dafu brightened. Are we doing a conspiracy? I am very good at conspiracies. That concerns me, Zhou Yuan said. It should, when I agreed. But he is right. You need to be more visible, not less. You need to be so obviously not a prince in hiding that no one would suspect you. How do I do that? She smiled. It was not a comforting smile. It was the smile of a general who had just thought of a truly devious strategy and was looking forward to deploying it. We make you worse at everything, much worse. And so began the most humiliating 3 weeks of Zhou Yuan's life. Under Wen Ai's direction, and with Dafu's enthusiastic assistance, Zhou Yuan became aggressively, publicly incompetent. He measured remedies incorrectly, but not dangerously so. He mixed up orders. He tripped over his own feet while carrying supplies through the market. He apologized profusely and often. He developed a reputation as a well-meaning disaster, the sort of person who tried very hard and failed in spectacular but harmless ways. Prince Yuan cannot even carry a basket without dropping something, old Madame Chen announced in the market one day, loudly enough for the imperial soldiers, who were still searching the town, to hear. A prince! Can you imagine? The soldiers could not imagine. They moved on. Dafu spread rumors with the single-minded dedication of a child who had been given permission to cause chaos. My sister's assistant claims he studied medicine, but yesterday he tried to make a poultice out of cooking herbs. Who does that? Certainly not a prince. Princes are educated. The town found this hilarious. Zhou Yuan, stumbling through the market with deliberately poor coordination while Wen Ai watched with barely suppressed laughter, found it significantly less amusing. This is humiliating, he muttered to her one evening as he deliberately botched the preparation of a simple cough remedy. This is keeping you alive, she corrected. Also, you are not that bad at pretending to be bad at things. I suspect you have practice. What do you mean? You are the third prince, not the heir, not the spare, but the one after that. You have spent your life being overlooked. You know how to seem harmless. She said this matter-of-factly, the way she might diagnose a patient. The question is whether you were pretending at court or whether you are pretending now. Zhou Yuan had no answer to that. He was not certain he knew anymore where the performance ended and the truth began. He had spent so long being the prince no one took seriously, too honest, too blunt, too invested in boring things like functional governance, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as anything else, except when I saw him. She saw through him. She had from the beginning, he realized. She had known he was lying and had let him stay anyway. Not because she was fooled, but because she had decided, for reasons he still did not fully understand, that he was worth the risk. I am not pretending with you, he said quietly. She looked up from the herbs she was sorting. In the lamplight, her face was soft, uncertain in a way he rarely saw. No? No. Everything I have told you about who I am, what I want, that is real. The only lie was the name. Zhou Yuan, she said, testing his full name for the first time. Third Prince of the Celestial Empire, currently wanted by imperial decree and hiding in my apothecary while pretending to be incompetent. Yes, this is going to end badly. Probably. You should leave. Go somewhere safer, somewhere you will not be found. I do not want to leave. Yuan. I do not want to leave, he repeated. I want to stay here, with you, helping with the shop. Being publicly terrible at herb preparation, I want... He stopped. What he wanted was too large to speak aloud, too dangerous to name. He wanted mornings grinding herbs while she hummed beside him. He wanted Dafu's ridiculous questions and the small warm routine of this borrowed life. He wanted her. When I was very still. You cannot stay forever. I know. Eventually, they will find you, or you will have to go back. I know that too. So what are we doing? What is this? Zhou Yuan had been raised in the imperial court. He knew about strategy, about long games and careful planning. He knew how to think 3 moves ahead, how to position himself for advantage, how to protect against future threats. Everything in his training said he should have a plan, should know how this ended, should be managing the risks and controlling the outcomes. I have absolutely no idea, he admitted. I am making catastrophically poor decisions and hoping for the best. She laughed. It was a small sound, half exasperated and half something else. That is the most honest thing you have ever said to me. I am trying to be better about honesty. It has not historically gone well for me. No, she agreed. I imagine it has not. They stood there in the small apothecary, surrounded by herbs and remedies and the comfortable mess of their shared work. Outside, the town was settling into evening, vendors closing their stalls, families gathering for dinner. Somewhere in the capital, Zhou Yuan's father was probably furious. Somewhere on the roads, soldiers were still searching. Somewhere in the future, all of this would catch up to them, and there would be consequences and prices to pay. But for now, in this moment, there was just the two of them and the space between them that felt both too large and not large enough. Stay for dinner, Wen I said finally. Dafu is making noodles. He is terrible at it, but he tries very hard. That sounds perfect, Zhou Yuan said, and meant it. The crisis, when it came, arrived in the form of Captain Wei. Zhou Yuan was in the shop's back room, actually successfully preparing a batch of digestive remedy, when he heard a familiar voice in the front room asking for the physician's assistant, the clumsy one from the north. He froze, mortar and pestle in hand, as several catastrophic realizations occurred in rapid succession. First, Captain Wei had found him. Second, Captain Wei was not alone. Zhou Yuan could hear at least 2 other voices, both with the clipped cadence of military men. Third, Wen Yi was currently in the front room with them, and she did not know that Captain Wei was his personal guard, and this was about to become very complicated very quickly. He set down the mortar and pestle with excessive care, as though any sudden movement might cause the entire situation to explode, and walked into the front room with the grim resignation of a man approaching his own execution. Captain Wei stood in the center of the shop, looking deeply uncomfortable in a way that made Zhou Yuan immediately suspicious. The captain was flanked by 2 other guards, both of whom were trying very hard not to look at Zhou Yuan, which meant they had definitely been told to look at Zhou Yuan and were failing to follow orders in real time. Wen I was behind the counter, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" Zhou Yuan said, going for harmless and landing somewhere near nauseous. Captain Wei's eye twitched. It was a very small twitch, barely noticeable, the sort of thing you would only see if you had known someone for 15 years and had learned to read their every minute expression. It meant, roughly translated, I am about to do something you will not like, and I need you to trust me. Zhou Yuan did not find this reassuring. We are looking for the third prince, Captain Wei announced, loudly enough that anyone on the street could hear. We have intelligence that he may be hiding in this town, possibly in this very shop. Oh no, Zhou Yuan thought. Oh no. We have been over this with the other soldiers when I said, with admirable calm. We have not seen any princes. Just my assistant, who is spectacularly unqualified for even basic apothecary work. Nevertheless, Captain Wei said, we will need to search the premises. Imperial orders. He was looking directly at Zhou Yuan as he said it. The expression on his face was doing complicated things that Zhou Yuan interpreted roughly as, I am creating a situation. You will understand why shortly. Please do not do anything stupid. Zhou Yuan, whose relationship with not doing stupid things was historically poor, nodded. The search that followed was theatrical to the point of absurdity. Captain Wei and his guards made a great show of examining every room, looking in storage closets, checking the small courtyard out back. They questioned Zhou Yuan extensively about his background, his training, his reason for being in Qinghe. Zhou Yuan answered with the story they had prepared. Yang Zhou, physician's nephew, seeking to learn the trade, while Captain Wei nodded along as though hearing this for the first time and finding it deeply unconvincing. Finally, after what felt like several years compressed into 30 minutes, Captain Wei declared the shop clear. You are certain, one of his guards said, that this man is not— Look at him, Captain Wei interrupted. Does he look like the third prince? The guard looked. Zhou Yuan, who had deliberately smudged dirt on his face that morning as part of his ongoing campaign to seem harmless, tried to radiate incompetence. No, sir, the guard admitted. The third prince is educated, well-spoken, and capable. This man— Captain Wei gestured at Zhou Yuan with barely concealed disdain. Tried to sell me a remedy for saddle sores. That was actually a poultice for infected wounds. He cannot even identify basic herbs correctly. This was a lie. Zhou Yuan had correctly identified the herbs. He had simply sold Captain Wei the wrong remedy on purpose, as part of the general campaign of strategic incompetence. The fact that Captain Wei was now using this as evidence of his unsuitability to be a prince was either brilliant or offensive, and Zhou Yuan had not decided which. We will continue the search elsewhere, Captain Wei declared. Then, before leaving, he turned back to Zhou Yuan and said, with perfect clarity, if you happen to encounter anyone of imperial status, you are to tell them that their presence is required back at the capital. The emperor is willing to discuss terms, a full pardon in exchange for their return and cooperation with a certain investigation into ministerial corruption. Do you understand? Zhou Yuan understood. He understood so completely that for a moment he forgot how to form words. Yes. If I encounter anyone of imperial status, I will pass along the message. See that you do. Captain Wei gave a crisp nod and swept out of the shop with his guards in tow. In the silence that followed, Zhou Yuan sat down on the nearest stool before his legs could give out. What, when I said slowly, was that? That was my personal guard, Zhou Yuan said, telling me in the least subtle way possible that I can go home. Your personal guard? Yes. Who just publicly declared that you are definitely not the third prince? Yes. By insulting you extensively. He has always been very dedicated to his job. When I pressed her fingers to her temples like she was developing a headache. So you can go back. To the capital. To being a prince. Apparently. That is good. That is what you wanted. Was it? Zhou Yuan was no longer certain. A month ago, he would have said yes. Being a prince was who he was, what he had been born to do. The chance to return, pardoned, with the emperor's backing to investigate the Minister of Revenue. That was everything he had risked exile to achieve. But a month ago, he had not known what it felt like to wake up with a purpose that was not about court politics or imperial duty. He had not known the particular satisfaction of grinding herbs correctly, of seeing a patient recover from an illness he had helped treat, of Dafu's terrible jokes over dinner, of when eyes smile when he managed to not destroy something. I do not know what I want, he admitted. You are a prince. You have a duty. I know. People are depending on you. The investigation. I know. She was quiet for a long moment. When will you leave? The question hurt more than it should have. I have not decided. Yuan, she said his name gently, like she was treating a wound. You cannot stay here. You know that. This was always temporary. It does not have to be. Yes, it does. You are the third prince. I am an apothecary in a small town. Those are not lives that fit together. They could. How? She spread her hands. You go back to the capital. You expose the corrupt minister. You do whatever it is that princes do. And then what? You visit sometimes? You send letters? You pretend that this was anything other than a brief escape from your real life? It was not an escape. It was... What? What was it? Zhou Yuan stood. He was not good at this, at emotional honesty, at making himself vulnerable, at admitting wants that could be used against him. But when I had taught him that honesty was its own kind of medicine, bitter but necessary. It was the first time I have ever felt like myself, he said. Not the third prince, not the spare son, not the political inconvenience, just myself, someone who could be useful without having to be important. Someone who could fail at grinding herbs and have it be funny instead of shameful. Someone who could, he stopped, started again. Someone who could love you without having to calculate whether it was politically advantageous. When I stared at him, You love me? Catastrophically, Zhou Yuan confirmed, in a way that demonstrates extremely poor judgment and no sense of self-preservation. I have been falling in love with you since you told me to stop being a baby about bitter medicine, and I have not had a sensible thought since. That is, you cannot just... She seemed to be struggling with words, which Zhou Yuan took as either a very good sign or a very bad one. You are a prince. Technically, yes, but it hasn't been going well for me. I could give it up. Become a physician full-time. I am terrible at it, but I could improve. You are not terrible at it. You are pretending to be terrible at it. I am moderately terrible at it, but I could learn. I want to learn. He took a step closer. I want to stay here, with you, if you will have me. The emperor will not let you give up your title. He might, if I'm annoying enough about it. I have a gift for being annoying. Yuan, or I could go back, do what needs to be done, and then come back here. We could... He was fumbling now, grasping for solutions to a problem that was probably unsolvable. I do not know how to make this work, but I know I do not want to leave without trying. When I looked at him, really looked at him with the same focused attention she gave to complex diagnoses, Zhou Yuan felt transparent, seen through, like she was reading every thought he had tried to hide. You really mean it, she said finally. You would give up being a prince. I would give up anything to stay here, with you. That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. I am aware. You would regret it, eventually. You would miss the court, the politics, the ability to actually fix things. I would miss you more. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were bright with something that might have been tears or fury or some complicated combination of both. You are going to go back to the capital. You are going to go back, she repeated firmly, because there is a corrupt minister bleeding the treasury dry, and you are one of the only people who can stop him. You are going to do your duty. You are going to be a prince, and you are not going to throw all of that away for you, Zhou Yuan supplied. Yes, I absolutely would. Well, I would not let you. She was crying now, properly crying, which Zhou Yuan had never seen before, and which made him feel like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. You think I want to be the reason you abandon your responsibilities? You think I could live with that? I think, Zhou Yuan said slowly, that you are finding reasons to make me leave because you are afraid of what happens if I stay. Of course I am afraid. You are a prince. I am nothing special. I run a small shop in a small town. Eventually you would realize that. And I would have given up my entire life to follow you to the capital, or you would have given up your entire future to stay here. And either way, someone would end up resenting someone else. And She stopped, breathed, started again, more quietly. I cannot be the reason your life gets smaller. You are the reason it feels bigger, Zhou Yuan said. They stood there on opposite sides of the counter, separated by less than 2 feet and an unbridgeable gap of everything that could not be reconciled. Duty and desire, responsibility and want. The lives they were supposed to live and the lives they had briefly built together. The door slammed open. Dafu stood in the doorway, breathing hard like he had been running. There are more soldiers coming, a lot of them, and they look official, like very official. How official, Wen I said, wiping her eyes quickly. Like they have the imperial seal on their banners official, like they are here for a prince official. Dafu looked at Zhou Yuan. I think you are about to stop pretending to be not important. Zhou Yuan felt the weight of inevitability settle over him like a familiar coat. Of course this was how it ended. Not with a decision, but with the decision being made for him by circumstances and duty and the inescapable fact of who he was. How long do I have? He asked. Maybe 5 minutes. They are being very ceremonious about entering the town. Lots of horses and announcing. 5 minutes. Not enough time to say everything he needed to say. Not enough time to solve the unsolvable problem of loving someone when your life belonged to an empire. He looked at Wen I. I have to go. I know. I do not want to. I know that too. If there was any way. There is not, she said gently. We both know there is not. Dafu, who had been watching this exchange with the shrewd eyes of a child who understood more than he was supposed to, said, You know, you could just ask her to come with you. Dafu? When I started. What? He is a prince. Princes can do things like that. He could bring you to the capital. You could have a big fancy shop. I could train with actual weapons masters instead of practicing with sticks in the courtyard. Dafu had clearly been thinking about this. It would be very practical. It would not be practical when I said, I cannot just leave. The shop is a shop. You are my sister. You have been taking care of me in this town for years. Maybe someone should take care of you for a change. Dafu crossed his arms. I am 11, not stupid. I see how you look at him, like he is a puzzle you solved and are proud of. You should go with him. I cannot. Why not? It was a simple question, a child's question. Why not? When I looked at Zhou Yuan. Zhou Yuan looked back, hope and terror doing complicated things to his chest. Because when I said slowly, I am afraid. Of what? Dafu demanded. Of everything, of leaving, of the capital, of not being good enough for that world, of losing myself, of... She stopped. Of what happens if I let myself want something that big and it does not work. But what if it does work? Dafu said. What if you go with him and it is good and you are happy? You are always telling me to try new remedies, to experiment, to not be afraid of failing. Why is this different? Because remedies do not break your heart if they fail, When I said quietly. Zhou Yuan, who had been a prince for 27 years and had negotiated with ministers and generals, and learned to play the complex games of court politics, discovered that he had no idea how to negotiate with the woman he loved when she was trying to protect herself from him. I cannot promise it will not fail, he said. I cannot promise the capital will not be overwhelming or that court life will not be terrible. I cannot promise any of that. But I can promise that I will spend every single day trying to make sure you do not regret coming with me. I can promise that I love you, and I can promise that if you let me, I will build you the finest apothecary the capital has ever seen, and you can continue to yell at me for mislabeling herbs and making remedies too strong. And Dafu can train with weapons masters and drive them as insane as he has driven us. I do not drive you insane, Dafu protested. You absolutely do, both Wen I and Zhou Yuan said in unison. Outside, the sound of horses and marching feet was growing louder. You have maybe 2 minutes, Dafu said. You should decide. Wen I pressed her hands to her face. When she lowered them, she looked exhausted and terrified, and resolved in a way that made Zhou Yuan's heart do painful things. If I do this, she said, I am bringing my entire stock of herbs. I am not starting over from nothing. Zhou Yuan blinked. Are you? And Dafu gets a real teacher, a good one. Not just weapons, but scholarship too. He is smarter than he pretends to be. I knew it, Dafu crowed. And you, she pointed at Zhou Yuan, are going to stop making catastrophically poor decisions and start thinking about consequences. I will absolutely not stop making catastrophically poor decisions, as evidenced by everything I have done in the past month. But I will try to make them less catastrophic. That is not reassuring. It is the best I can offer, she laughed. It was a slightly hysterical sound, the laugh of someone who had just decided to jump off a cliff and hope for the best. We are all going to regret this. Probably, Zhou Yuan agreed, but we will regret it together. That is also not reassuring. And yet you are smiling. She was. Despite everything, the terror, the uncertainty, the sound of imperial guards literally marching toward them, she was smiling. I am going to need a very large cart for the herbs. I will get you 10 carts. That is excessive. I am a prince. Excessive is what we do. The door opened. Captain Wei stood there, looking harassed. My lord, the imperial delegation has arrived. Your father sent his personal guards and a very official letter. You are required to return to the capital immediately. He paused. I told them you would need a moment to say goodbye to your... He looked at Wenai. Friends. Not friends, Zhou Yuan said. This is physician Wenai. She will be coming with us, as will her brother. They will need accommodations in the capital, and we will need carts for her medical supplies. Captain Wei's expression did not change, but something in his eyes warmed. How many carts, my lord? 10. We have 3 with the delegation. Then we will get more in the next town. This is not negotiable. Of course, my lord. Captain Wei looked at Wenai and bowed. Properly bowed, the way he would bow to someone of rank. Physician Wen, it will be an honor to have you at the capital. His Highness has been insufferable in your absence. I have been right here, Zhou Wen protested. Exactly, insufferable. Captain Wei straightened. I will inform the delegation that you will be traveling with companions. We leave within the hour. He withdrew, leaving them alone again. 10 carts is really excessive, Wenai said. You have a lot of herbs. Not that many. I am not taking any chances. What if you need to set up the new shop immediately and you are missing a crucial ingredient? You are ridiculous. You are coming with me anyway. I am going to regret this so much. Probably, Zhou Yuan agreed. He took her hand, she let him. But think of how interesting the regret will be. Dafu, who had been watching this exchange with barely contained glee, said, I am going to pack. I am bringing my stick swords. You are not bringing stick swords to the imperial palace, Wenai called after him. I am absolutely bringing my stick swords. His voice floated back from the direction of the storage room. Princes probably love stick swords. Zhou Yuan, who had never in his life met a prince who loved stick swords, decided this was not the moment to mention that. Instead, he stood in the small apothecary with the woman he loved, surrounded by herbs and remedies and the familiar smell of dried ginseng, and let himself believe, just for a moment, that catastrophically poor decisions might sometimes lead to catastrophically good outcomes. We should pack, Wenai said finally, but she did not let go of his hand. We should, Zhou Yuan agreed. He did not let go either. Outside, the imperial delegation was preparing for departure. Inside, 2 people who had built something small and precious out of lies and medicine and shared disasters began the complicated work of figuring out how to keep it. It was going to be a mess. It was going to be complicated. It was going to require more carts than was reasonable and probably a great deal of explaining to an emperor who did not appreciate being defied. Zhou Yuan could not wait. The journey back to the capital took 12 days and required, in the end, 7 carts instead of 10. A compromise that Wenai claimed was sensible and Zhou Yuan privately considered a personal failure. Dafu spent most of the journey pestering Captain Wei about military tactics and sword forms. Captain Wei, to his credit, answered every question with solemn seriousness while shooting Zhou Yuan looks that clearly said, You see what you have brought upon us. Zhou Yuan regretted nothing. Well, he regretted some things. Specifically, he regretted not adequately preparing Wenai for the sheer overwhelming absurdity that was the imperial palace. She had taken the marble courtyards in stride. She had nodded politely at the elaborate gardens. But when they were escorted to the Hall of Supreme Harmony, and she realized exactly how much supreme harmony meant in terms of architectural excess, she had stopped walking and simply stared. This is where you live, she had said faintly. Technically, I live in the prince's quarters, which are significantly less. Zhou Yuan gestured vaguely at the towering pillars and gold leaf everything. This is insane. It is actually quite restrained by imperial standards. That is not comforting. I did warn you. You said it was fancy. You did not say it was fancy like this. She was still staring at the elaborate painted ceiling beams. How do people concentrate with all this? Everywhere. Poorly, Zhou Yuan admitted. Mostly we just ignore it. How do you ignore this? Practice. Before Wenai could respond to that, a eunuch appeared and announced, with excessive formality, that His Celestial Majesty would see the third prince immediately, and also who were these people he had brought back with him, and why were there 7 carts of medical supplies currently blocking the eastern courtyard. The audience with the emperor went better than Zhou Yuan had expected, which was to say it was only moderately catastrophic, instead of completely disastrous. His Celestial Majesty sat upon the dragon throne, looking every inch the supreme ruler of the empire, and also profoundly irritated with his third son. "You stole a horse," the emperor said without preamble. "You fled your official escort. You disappeared for over a month. You caused a minor political incident. And you return with a physician, a small boy with stick swords, and enough herbs to supply a hospital." "Yes, father." "Explain." So, Zhou Yuan explained. He explained about the Minister of Revenue's corruption, the falsified records, the diverted funds, the network of bribed officials. He explained how he had needed time to gather evidence, to understand the scope of the problem. He explained about Qinghe, about the apothecary, about Wenai and Dafu. What he did not explain, because some things were too personal for throne rooms, was how he had learned that being useful was more satisfying than being important, that honesty was easier when you had nothing left to lose, and that falling in love with someone who saw you as a person instead of a prince was the most terrifying and necessary thing he had ever done. The emperor listened with the expression of a man who had raised 4 sons and was perpetually exhausted by all of them. "You are telling me," he said finally, "that you fled imperial justice, hid in a provincial town, and fell in love with an apothecary." "That is an accurate summary, yes. And you believe this apothecary should be brought to the capital because I intend to marry her," Zhou Yuan said, "if she will have me, which is not certain, given my track record of catastrophically poor decisions." Behind him he heard Wenai make a small sound that might have been a gasp, or a laugh, or both. The emperor looked past Zhou Yuan to where Wenai stood. "Physician Wen, you are aware that my son is an idiot?" "Yes, your majesty," Wenai said. She had bowed. Properly, someone must have coached her, but her voice was steady. "I have been treating him for it. The prognosis is poor." The emperor's mouth twitched. It might have been the beginning of a smile. "And you wish to marry this idiot anyway?" There was a long pause. Zhou Yuan held his breath. His entire future hung on what Wenai said next, and he realized, with a strange calm, that he had no idea what she would choose. "I do," Wenai said finally. "Someone has to make sure he does not accidentally poison himself with mislabeled herbs." The emperor did smile then. It was small but genuine. "Very well. You will be married at the end of the month. The Minister of Revenue will be investigated, quietly, competently, by people who do not call him a tortoise in open court. You," he looked at Zhou Yuan, "will assist with the investigation. You will also stop making catastrophically poor decisions." "I will try, father." "Trying is not succeeding." "No," Zhou Yuan agreed. "But it is the best I can offer." The emperor sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had long since accepted that his sons would give him nothing but headaches and occasional moments of pride. "You are dismissed. Take your physician. Take your carts. Try not to cause any more incidents before the wedding." Zhou Yuan bowed. Wenai bowed. They backed out of the throne room with the careful precision of people who could not quite believe they had survived. In the courtyard, Dafu was teaching 2 palace guards his stick sword forms. Captain Wei was watching with the expression of a man contemplating early retirement. "How did it go?" Captain Wei asked. "We are getting married," Zhou Yuan said. "I am aware. I arranged the cart specifically to enable this outcome." "You did not wait, did you?" Captain Wei's expression was unreadable. "I have no idea what you're talking about, my lord. I am simply a loyal servant who coincidentally ensured that Physician Wen's entire livelihood could be easily transported to the capital." "You are the worst retainer in the history of the empire," Zhou Yuan said. "And yet you keep me employed." Captain Wei bowed. "Congratulations, my lord. Try not to destroy anything before the wedding." The wedding, when it happened, was both more and less than Zhou Yuan had expected. More because the imperial family did nothing by halves, and even a third prince's wedding required elaborate ceremony and excessive decoration and enough food to feed a small army. Less because in the middle of all the ceremony and decoration and food, there was just the 2 of them standing together, making promises they both hoped they could keep. Wen Ai wore red, the traditional bridal color, and looked beautiful and terrified in equal measure. Zhou Yuan wore formal court robes and felt exactly the same way. Last chance to run, he murmured as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Where would I go? You brought all my herbs here. I'm trapped by logistics. That was the plan. It was a good plan. Captain Wei's plan, actually. He is smarter than you. Significantly. The ceremony began. They bowed to heaven and earth, to the emperor, to each other. They drank from the same cup. They were declared married with all the formality and authority of imperial decree. And then finally, they were alone in Zhou Yuan's quarters, which were now their quarters. And when I looked around at the elaborate furnishings and the excessive space and said, "This is going to take some getting used to. We could redecorate, make it more like the shop. You want to make your imperial quarters look like a cramped apothecary. I want it to feel like home." She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she had that first day when he had collapsed in her doorway, fevered and desperate and running from everything he could not face. "You are serious. Catastrophically serious. As serious as I am about everything. Which is to say probably too serious, but I cannot seem to help it." She laughed. The sound filled the elaborate room, made it smaller and warmer and infinitely more bearable. "All right, we will make it look like home, but I am keeping the medicine supplies organized properly. Your system is chaos. My system is innovative. Your system is chaos," she repeated firmly. Then, softer, "But I suppose I can live with it." Zhou Yuan kissed her. She kissed him back. Outside, the palace continued its complicated dance of politics and power and careful formality. Inside, two people who had built something real out of lies and medicine and shared disasters held on to each other and decided that all of this chaos and complication and catastrophic poor decision-making was exactly what they wanted. The new apothecary opened 3 months later in the capital's artisan quarter. It was significantly larger than the Qinghe shop, with proper storage and organized shelves, and enough space for Wen Ai to take on apprentices. Da Fu, when not training with the palace weapons masters, worked there after his lessons, grinding herbs with the same careless enthusiasm he brought to everything. Zhou Yuan helped when his official duties allowed. He was still terrible at measuring some things. Old habits died hard. But he had gotten significantly better at listening, at asking questions before acting, at thinking about consequences, most of the time. There was still the incident with the Minister of Revenue's arrest, which Zhou Yuan had definitely not been supposed to personally participate in, but had anyway because some things were too satisfying to delegate. There was the matter of the parliamentary reforms he had pushed through by being so aggressively persistent that the other ministers had agreed just to make him stop talking. There was the ongoing saga of Da Fu's education, which had expanded to include literature and philosophy and was creating a child with far too many opinions about governance. But these were small disasters, manageable disasters, the kind of chaos that Zhou Yuan had learned to navigate with Wen Ai beside him, calling him an idiot with great affection and keeping him from accidentally destroying everything through sheer stubborn honesty. On the first anniversary of their wedding, they closed the apothecary early and had dinner in their quarters, now properly decorated with a pleasing mix of imperial elegance and organized medicine shelves. Da Fu was at the palace, pestering Captain Wei about military history. They were alone. "Do you regret it?" Zhou Yuan asked. "Coming here, marrying me, all of it." Wen Ai considered this seriously, the way she considered all his questions. "Sometimes," she admitted. "When the court politics are particularly absurd, when I miss the simplicity of Qinghe, when you do something catastrophically stupid and I have to fix it. That is fair. But mostly no. Mostly I think about how I might have spent my whole life in that small shop, never knowing that I could have this disaster, this chaos, you." She smiled. "So no, I do not regret it, even when you are being an idiot, which is often." "Which is very often," she agreed. She took his hand. "But you are my idiot. I have decided to keep you." Zhou Yuan, third prince of the Celestial Empire, former exile, current political reformer, and perpetual disaster, looked at his wife and thought that perhaps catastrophically poor decisions were just decisions that looked catastrophic until they turned out right. I am going to make more poor decisions, he warned her. I know. Some of them will probably be very catastrophic. I am prepared. I love you. I know that too. She leaned against him, comfortable and certain. Now stop talking and drink your tea before it gets cold. I made it properly this time. No medicinal additions. You added medicine to my tea? Only when you were being particularly stubborn. It was a light sedative, very mild. What? It helped. You made better decisions when you were calm. Zhou Yuan laughed because there was nothing else to do. Because she was right. Because this was his life now. Chaos and medicine and a woman who loved him enough to occasionally drug his tea for his own good. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. It was everything he had never known he wanted. And he would not change a single catastrophic moment of it.